I want to thank Dick and Ginny for inviting me to speak on some of the postural assessments. Now we're going to talk about flexibility. It's my pleasure to have Al Russell with us. Al, I have the pleasure of working with Al day to day. Al brings a wealth of information. He's been a professional baseball athletic trainer with the Anaheim Angels Baseball Club for 9 years. Al's also a certified strength and conditioning specialist through the NSCA, and he's also a performance enhancement specialist. And we have the opportunity every day to work with professional athletes to get the flexibility and the postural work going on a day-to-day basis. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk right now about some flexibility. Before we get into the specific flexibility exercises, I'd like to briefly talk about some concepts and why it's so important to stretch out. There's a concept we're going to talk about called pattern overload, and pattern overload is where you're using the same muscles over and over and over. And an example is the repetitive nature of pitching. When you're pitching, you use the same exact muscles in the same range of motion with the same speed over and over. What ends up happening is you develop something called adaptive shortening. The muscles that you use for pitching get extremely tight. Your pec muscles get very tight, your anterior deltoid gets tight, the bicep gets tight, a muscle up under your shoulder blade called your subscapularis, which is part of the rotator cuff, gets very tight, and your lat gets tight. Also, through the lower body, and from when we talked about our postural assessment, there's certain muscles that get tight, and when we go through the flexibility, we'll explain that. What ends up happening is typically people think to increase their velocity that they need to strengthen muscles doing such as a bench press. And the bench press leads into the adaptive shortening patterns. Bench press uses the same exact muscles, and it pulls you into those postural distortion patterns that we talked about before. Rounded shoulders, forward head, and all that leads you into is overusing your rotator cuff. And so it's not going to develop increased velocity on your ball, because what ends up happening is when you're benching, it's such a slow speed, it's in a completely different range of motion, and it doesn't utilize the entire body. And when you're throwing, you're using muscles from your lower extremity, through your core, all the way up through your arm. And so there's a lot of variations you can use to strengthen the specific muscles that are going to make you throw faster. An example, and we only use this as an example to prove a point, you can significantly increase your strength and your size of the muscle by doing other exercises that don't create the same postural stress. For example, Al and I had the opportunity to work with, during combine preparations last year, the first defensive player that was taken by the Dallas Cowboys, and he was able to increase his bench rep max from 16 reps at 225 pounds up to 30. And that was in a 4 to 6 week period of time, and he really only benched 2 to 3 times just for testing. We used variations, and Jenny's going to show you, where we trained a lot of core and a lot of the scapular muscles, ones that are going to help you throw faster and also protect your shoulder, and they can also significantly increase your strength. So enough of that, we just wanted to add that as a point. The reason it's so important to do flexibility training is you're going to maintain normal muscle length, because when you don't maintain normal muscle length, what ends up happening is you pull the joints out of alignment, you put stress on other muscles, and first thing that happens is you decrease your performance. Second thing that happens is you get something called tissue overload, where you start using the tissue too much and it breaks down. Third thing that happens is you get injured. So it's very important to stretch the muscles back to their normal length after using them. And with pitching, because it is a total body activity, we're going to go through a total body flexibility program. Flexibility also improves blood flow through the muscle, so it brings new oxygen into the muscle, it brings nutrients into the muscle, so it helps the muscle recover. So enough of that, we're going to go ahead and get started with Al demonstrating our flexibility routine.
One question, Mike, excuse me. Let me get this straight now. So in pitching, because the chest gets tight, that means that the next day after pitching, if you want to get that balanced, more balanced, that's the day that you would work your back.
Exactly.
Because your back's been stretched and now you need to tighten it up, and your chest has been tight, so you need to stretch out your chest.
Exactly. Very well said.
Okay.
And then core and balance. And that would be a great off-day conditioning program, strengthening all the scapular muscles and all the muscles that control the shoulder on the back side, and then strengthen all of the core muscles. And then stretch the muscles in front.
Good.
The other thing, there's a common misconception that swimming is a good way for pitchers to maintain flexibility around the shoulder. What ends up happening though, that's exactly the same movement, not exactly, but similar movement patterns to throwing, and so it's actually tightening the same exact muscles that you use during pitching. It adds to pattern overload and that adaptive shortening, which changes your posture, and it goes into all the things that we explained during the postural assessment. Okay, so with flexibility, remember, let's try to relate this back now to our postural assessment. We're going to stretch out the calf muscles. You have two of them. One's called the gastrocnemius, which is the long one, and the next one's called the soleus. It's the short one. And there's two different techniques that you're going to use to stretch. Now, the reason when we'd want to add flexibility to those muscles is when I had Al doing an overhead squat, if his feet turned to the outside, I would know those muscles are tight, and so I'm going to want to add that into my routine. So an example of how we can stretch those muscles, we're going to put the joint in the right position. A lot of people, their foot wants to flatten out or cave in. So what we want to do is tell people to bring their arch up about 1/4 of an inch off the ground so that joint's in alignment. And then what we're going to do is Al's going to position himself. I'm going to act as a wall, and you can just have the person go into that position. Leg is going to go straight behind them as far as they can with keeping the arch up, and then Al's just going to get a stretch in that leg. And during static stretching, our basic routine is going to be 3 sets of 20 seconds and holding that position until you feel just a good, comfortable stretch. You don't want to feel pain. You just want to feel a nice tug on the muscle. And you're just going to hold, and you're going to repeat both sides. The next one we're going to do is stretch the short calf muscle, which is called the soleus. To do that, all that we're going to do, make sure that joint's in alignment, and then we're going to just bend the knee about 20 to 30 degrees, and he's going to get the same stretch. You want to make sure the heel stays on the ground, and again, feel a comfortable stretch. This stretch should feel lower down in your Achilles tendon area, down by your heel. Okay, good. Next stretch we're going to go into is stretching the hamstrings. The hamstrings, what you're going to see is if you see someone dropping their back into extension a lot of times their stomach muscles are very weak, and when their stomach muscles are weak, your hamstrings try to compensate to realign your pelvis. And if that happens, your hamstrings get extremely tight, so we need to stretch them out. We're going to go through 2 techniques. The first technique, Al's going to get down into a track position, which is you just go down here, you're going to line up your front leg, the heel with your back leg toe about shoulder width apart. Al's going to come up out of the position, and what you're going to do, the front leg is the leg that you're actually stretching. Okay? You go down. On this one, this is more of a dynamic stretch. You have the person come up out of the position. They're going to take it to a comfortable position. They're going to hold it for 5 seconds, and then we're going to repeat that 5 to 10 times. We're also going to add in where Al turns his foot to the outside slightly to stretch the inside hamstring muscles, because you have three sets of hamstring, and we want to stretch all portions of the hamstring. Same thing. You're taking it up. You hold for 5 seconds. You repeat 5 to 10 times. The next one we're going to do is turn Al's foot all the way in to stretch the outside hamstring. And this would be also an example of if you see your athlete when they're standing with their feet turned out, typically they're very tight on the outside hamstring, so this exercise is extremely good to stretch that area out. Also, if you have a pitcher that closes too much as they come through, that muscle is very tight and it puts a lot of stress through their knee. It also puts stress on the back of their rotator cuff and their bicep tendon. So if you have a pitcher and they're closing too much, that muscle's typically tight and you want to get that stretched out. Okay, the next one we're going to go to, probably one of the most important muscles to stretch in pitchers, is the psoas, the deep hip flexor muscle. This is the one we're seeing when Al, if I have him do an overhead squat, if his back arches or his hands come forward, or if you see that the stomach muscles are extremely weak, that's going to be you're going to see an increased arch in the low back. That's from tightness in that psoas. What ends up happening, and we're going to explain briefly, if Al is a right-handed pitcher, we'll go here. If Al's a right-handed pitcher, if this muscle's tight, let's go through a position, Al, where you're striding out. If this muscle's tight, it tips the pelvis forward. It shortens the lat muscle, which attaches, remember, to your shoulder blade and here. So what it does, it rotates your humerus forward. So to recreate an angle, you're putting increased stress where you push the joint forward, and you're going to tip away, and you're going to tighten a lot of muscles in your body. You're going to significantly reduce the amount of force you can produce, and you're going to put tremendous stress through the rest of your body because your balance is all off. And so tightness there creates a tremendous stress to the bicep tendon and to the supraspinatus. So anytime you have a kid your athlete, your pitcher that goes to the doctor or a trainer, and they're telling you just to do these exercises because you have bicep tendonitis, remember the rest of the body works together as well. So you have to link that. So the stretch, Al's going to stride back as far as he can. We're stretching the right hip. He's turning the toe in as much as he can comfortably. The heel stays down on the ground. This arm goes up into the air. I'm going to ask Al to suck his belly button directly into his spine. I'm going to have him tighten his butt muscles. Then I'm going to have him bend away. And then once he bends away, then I'm going to have him keep the bend. I'm going to have him rotate slightly back. And that's a really good stretch of that area up in there. And think of pitching, it's exactly positions they need to be in. If this is flexible, they can create any arm angle they need to create without stressing the bicep tendon or rotator cuff. Okay. Oftentimes, another muscle that's extremely tight with the psoas is the rectus femoris, which is one of your quad muscles. It attaches from the hip down to your kneecap. So if you have an athlete that has patellar tendonitis, pain in the front of their knee, this muscle's often tight, so we're going to stretch that as well. We'll have Al go down into a kneeling position, stride out as far back as he can. We're going to turn the foot to the outside. We're going to, same thing, abs are going to be in, butt is going to be tight, arm up into the air. He's going to side bend away, and then he's going to use this hand on the inside of his thigh, and he's going to rotate himself back across. Keep that side bend, and you want to get a nice stretch up and through there. Remember, all static stretches, we're holding 3 sets. We're doing 3 sets, and we're holding for approximately 20 seconds. Get a comfortable feel, no pain. And you
now
want
I got another question.
Okay.
If you've got somebody that just has a really weak core, wouldn't it be possible that even these stretches are hard to do?
That's a very good point. A lot of times, flexibility deficits or problems where muscles are too tight come from weakness in the core. An example, if Al has extremely weak lower abdominal muscles, and he's demonstrating it very nicely, if his psoas can overcompensate for weakness in the lower abs. So for example, if Al can't control his lumbar spine, this controlled position of his hips, then what will happen, the psoas muscle that we keep talking about is a hip flexor. It attaches from your hip all the way deep up in and attaches to your lumbar spine, into your back. So what will happen, if the stomach muscles aren't strong enough, that muscle becomes tight. But what the unfortunate thing is it does the exact opposite of what your stomach muscles do. It pulls you into an anterior position where you arch your back and flex your hips. If he's trying to balance with a flexed hip, he's not going to be able to control that position. His knee is going to cave in, and he's going to come off and stride off too early, and there's going to be technical deficits because of lack of balance and strength. And so it's very important to add all those together. So, very important to stretch the psoas and strengthen the core. One thing I want to add before we continue with flexibility, anytime you stretch something, make sure you always go back and strengthen the new range of motion. It's something called naive range of motion. For example, if my hip is tight and if I can't get extension as I'm going to rotate, if I can't get extension through there, and now all of a sudden I've given myself another 10 degrees of range of motion, I need to strengthen the muscles that control that range. Otherwise, I'm going to create increased stress that my body can't handle. So a great example where you need to incorporate core and balance and functional strength with flexibility. Next muscle we're going to add in is the piriformis, which is one of your hip rotators. Same thing, if you see the athlete with their feet turned out, or as they squat down, their knees kind of cave in, a lot of times you're going to see tightness up in this upper butt muscle. You want to bring it up so the heel is right in the mid portion of the thigh, and then you're going to pull the knee towards your opposite shoulder only as far as you can without bringing this hip off the ground. You want to have the athlete feel the stretch right in through that area, and then you're going to again hold 3 sets of 20 seconds. Okay, let's have you go ahead and stand up then, Al. That muscle is extremely important to stretch. When you're standing in your balance position, there's a muscle, and I'm going to show you on this side on Al, there's a muscle here, it's called your glute medius. It's one of your deep hip muscles that stabilize your leg. If that is weak, what ends up happening is the pelvis drops a little bit and he ends up tightening that muscle up. And when that muscle's tight, it attaches to this bone, your big thigh bone, which is called the femur. It attaches to that and it rotates it in. And if that bone rotates in, look at what happens all the way down the chain. So he's going to get compensations all the way through. So very important to stretch that out. Tightness in that muscle, say for instance if Al is a right-handed pitcher, if that muscle's tight, when Al, go through a deceleration position for me, Al. No, you're right-hander.
Right-hander.
Yeah, right-hander, decelerate towards there. As he decelerates, if this muscle is tight and doesn't help control the force through that leg all the way down, all that stress comes up right to the back of the shoulder. So now let's come back up. Tightness here leads to pain in the back of the shoulder and leads to pain in the front of the shoulder because of weakness and tightness on that hip. Okay, so very important to look at flexibility there.
Another question. Doesn't running tighten up the piriformis?
Running definitely can tighten up the piriformis, and the reason why is when you're on one leg, that muscle that we just talked about, your glute medius, has to stabilize your pelvis. If it's weak, you compensate with the muscle in the front of your thigh and the muscle in the back of your thigh, the piriformis. So your legs can cave in, you can create stress to the knee, to the foot, to the shin. That's why a lot of people get shin pain, and you can also stress the low back.
So why are we running?
Good question.
That's a good point.
That's a very good question.
Okay, I don't need to say anymore.
Okay, next one we're going to go into is stretching the lat. We've already talked a lot about what happens with the lat. Somebody with an overhead squat, as they go down, their back arches too much, or as they go down, their arms come forward too much. So we're going to start with 2-arm lat stretch. You don't need a physio ball. It's nice to have because it adapts real well, but you can use a chair, you can use a countertop, you can use a partner. You can have your partner go on all fours in front of you and do the same stretch. What I want to see here is Al's taking his belly button and taking it straight up into his spine, keeping everything tight. Thumbs are up, very important. The lat, when it's short, it rotates your thumbs in, and when you pitch, you're going to get into those positions a lot, get adaptive shortening, so you want to externally rotate or turn the thumb up in the air and feel a nice stretch through the shoulder blade area. Now to make it more specific, go down on one arm. We're going to make it a diagonal stretch, let his head drop down, and we're going to get a nice stretch through that back of the rotator cuff and also his lat. Important not to let your athlete arch their back, because arching the back shortens the lat and you don't really even feel much of a stretch. Very, very important. So same thing, 3 sets of 20 seconds with 2 arms, 3 sets of 20 seconds with each arm. This is a very important part of arm care. And later, when Ginny goes through the core and the balance, she'll probably reiterate the importance of arm care during throwing, and this is a crucial part of it. Stretching and flexibility are crucial. Okay. Next muscle we're going to go into, you can stay down there, we're going to stretch out the pecs. You have 2 muscles. You have one real big one, and on Al's very big, you have the pec major, and then you have another one, the pec minor, deep underneath. Okay. So one we're going to have at a 45-degree angle, and he's just going to let his shoulder drop down. Again, some people might say, wow, you're really stressing out the front, the anterior capsule or the front of the capsule. But if you do the stretch right, where Al is, you should just feel a nice stretch in through there. He's pinching his shoulder blades back and down, and he's just getting a nice stretch through the pec. And to make it more, thumb up in the air. Okay?
Always thumb up.
Always thumb up. Now, if Al let his shoulders roll forward, let your round out. Now that's stressing the anterior capsule.
Okay.
Bad stretch. If he pinches his blades, thumb up, now he has a good stretch. Now if I take him straight out to the side, different stretch. He gets different parts of the fibers of the muscle. Okay, same thing. Good. Now, what I'd like to do is, a lot of times, a lot of pitchers complain of low back pain because they're constantly rotating and creating that force and just get that real, and this is the importance of the core, to create that force. But a lot of times the back gets extremely tight, so we want to stretch that out. So I'm going to give Al a back stretch where he's going to lay over top. This one you kind of do need a physio ball because it adapts to your body. So he's going to lay in a position, arms overhead. Remember, thumbs are turned out because we want to stretch that lat. Belly buttons into the spine, and he's just getting a nice, comfortable stretch. On this one, we only want to hold for about 10 seconds so all the blood doesn't rush to his head. Okay? And then once you do that about 5 times, take it back, get a nice stretch for 10 seconds, come forward, back for 10 seconds. Great way to stretch your lat all the way down into your pelvis. Okay? Now, next one, remember what we were talking about. When the psoas is tight and it makes your back go into extension, and then to create arm angles, a lot of times you bend your spine over, you tighten a muscle on deep into your low back called your quadratus lumborum. It's just a deep muscle deep into your back. So we need to stretch that with the lat. So the bottom leg is going to be bent up, top leg is straight and kind of behind, and then Al is going to go ahead and just stretch all the way over the ball and just get a nice comfortable stretch through that hole. He's stretching his lat, he's stretching that quadratus muscle, he's also stretching that hip. Okay, so this is a real good stretch. To make it a little bit more effective, Al can rotate forward. Now he's getting into those positions. Okay, you can hold each of those positions again, 3 sets of 20 seconds. Good. Next one we're going to go into is stretching. You have a series of nerves that come out of your neck, and a lot of times most pitchers who have elbow problems on the inside of their elbow have complained of pain, sometimes tingling, that goes down their arm. A lot of times it's from tightness in the nerve, and a lot of times that stems from the neck. So we're going to show a couple of stretches to stretch those nerves, okay? So the first one is going to be putting the palm, again, I can be a wall, he's just using me as a wall. You're going to keep the shoulder blades pinched back and down, abs in. He's going to use his opposite hand, and he's going to go ahead and pull his opposite ear to his opposite shoulder, and he's getting a nice stretch all the way down the nerve, okay? Now with this stretch, you're not going to hold it for 20 seconds because the nerve responds different than a muscle. So you're only going to hold it, take it over, and you're going to only do that for about 2 seconds and then let it back off, and you only do 6 repetitions because the nerve can't take the same kind of force. Very important for arm care. Now we're going to stretch a different nerve. Go ahead, and a lot of times if athletes are complaining of pain on the outside of their elbow, it's from a nerve that goes up in their neck, and it's back, it gets pinched off in here. Actually, it gets pinched in the neck, but they feel it down in their elbow. Same thing, 2 seconds holding, 6 seconds of stretching. I'm sorry, 6 repetitions, 2 seconds of stretching. The last series of exercises we're going to show are stretching the neck muscles. Again, think of positions, you're getting up where your head is rotating and side bending. A lot of times the opposite side gets really, really tight, which pulls things out of alignment. And so what we need to do is stretch those back out to normal length. What we'll do is we'll go here so they can see this stretch. Al's hand is going to be placed behind his back. This hand is on the opposite side. We're going to do 3 stretches here. He's going to pull his ear right to the opposite shoulder, stretching a group of muscles in here. Same thing, holding 3 sets of 20 seconds. Then we're going to do it where he's taking his eyes towards his opposite pocket. So if I held his pocket open, he's looking right into his pocket. Chin and eyes right to that pocket. And that's a different stretch. That's right up here. That muscle is called your levator scapula. It gets tight a lot, and it changes the way your shoulder blade moves. The third one we're going to do is he's going to rotate, and he's going to kind of pull himself up into the air. Let's actually look this way just a little bit more, and then bring your head right there. And he's now stretching a muscle in the front. And this muscle that he's stretching, it's a big long word. It's called your sternocleidomastoid. Not very important that you remember the muscle name, but to remember that this, and relax, if that muscle gets tight, there's a joint right here, and that joint, if that muscle's tight, doesn't rotate. For you to bring your arm up into arm angles, this joint has to rotate backwards 45 degrees, which is a lot of rotation. If that's tight, it doesn't allow that joint to rotate. You have to get increased rotation at this joint, which again, most throwers have instability. And so we gotta add those stretches into it. And again, now what we're gonna end up going into is core and balance training with Ginny, and she'll reiterate the importance of posture and flexibility, and also a comprehensive conditioning program.
I just want to ask you, how many times a week would you do flexibility training?
We try to do some form of flexibility training every day.
Some form every day?
Some form every day.
Because what I'm seeing here is that the old rotator cuff exercises, we can take emphasis off of those kind of things and actually go on to this, because you're calling this arm care and I'm saying the whole body. But,
exactly.
But what we're saying is that the whole body is related to what happens in the arm, so it is arm care, even though you're doing the neck and his lats and his lower back and whatnot. So some form of, how many minutes? Maybe 15 minutes?
This whole routine should take Al about 12 minutes. Is what it
so
usually.
Once,
no more than 15.
No more than 15. And again, once we you can give your athletes pictures of the exercises, write the definitions, follow the tape, and it's very easy to implement it with a large group of athletes. At our facility, we would have 30 professional athletes at a time going through this flexibility routine, very easy.